people want to drink, they can. No judgment. So thank you for having me. It's excited to be here in this beautiful, beautiful venue. And so I'm Matti Anttila, founder of Great and Barrel Spirits. I have been creating brands for most of my career. So probably 20 plus brands, a lot in the alcohol beverage space, but not all in the alcohol beverage space. So I've done stuff in the bakery space, snacks, automotive. Actually created a fuel brand called Winter Circle. That was quite fun. In the health and wellness space, apparel. So really had a lot of experience creating brands. And the idea of treasure, I never really thought about that as part of that process, but it really makes a lot of sense. And a lot of the brands that I've created have been kind of in the shower inspirations, right? So from the ground up, an idea to inception. So really kind of creating treasure from nothing and then bringing it to life and bringing it out to the world. And some have been kind of going back in time and finding lost treasure and resurrecting it. And so this is going to be about one of those brands that really was a process of going back in time and finding something that was really unique and cool and figuring out how to bring it and make it relevant to today. So, chicken cock whiskey. How many people have heard of chicken cock? Okay, more. All right, more people need to learn about it. But it's a really neat brand, as we'll go into. It's known as the famous old brand. And so the story behind it is, this was about 12 years ago, and I was doing research into the early days of distilling in the United States. And if anyone knows the history of distilling in the US, before Prohibition, there were hundreds of distilleries, thousands of brands. And most of those brands were wiped out when we instituted Prohibition. And those that survived Prohibition, many were then wiped out by World War II when most of the distilleries in the United States had to convert to war use versus drinking alcohol. So the brands that were able to kind of survive that time kind of went through all kinds of different iterations. And if you followed the kind of revival of American whiskey, in particular bourbon, a lot of the brands that are now coming to market, have come to market in the last 10 years, have been revival stories, because there was basically an infinite amount of brands that you can kind of tap into that were around in the 19th century that died off at various points in time. So chicken cock was a process for me of going through and doing research into the early days of distilling in the US, coming across these thousands of brands, looking at them and then finding one that jumped off the page called chicken cock. So it was the first thing that struck me was like, chicken cock, why would someone name the brand chicken cock? What is this? It was intriguing, right? And so I started digging in deeper, and we'll go to the next slide, I think we have. And I started figuring out that this had an amazing history to it that had been basically lost. One of the oldest American whiskey brands, so 1856 was the official founding, but we've actually figured out that they started distilling in the 1840s in Paris, Kentucky, which is the county seat of Bourbon County. So if anyone's been to Paris, it's about 45 minutes outside of Lexington. It was founded 19 years prior to Jack Daniels. So obviously Jack Daniels, big American whiskey brand, so it's older than Jack Daniels, and had gone through a variety of owners over the years. The remnants of the distillery are still, you can see them as you drive into Paris. They're just bricks at this point, but still there. It was burned down in the 1950s. And as I started digging into the story, I realized very quickly that it was actually a very big brand during the 19th century. So it was one of the biggest bourbon brands. And then the other piece of it that really was the sealed the deal for me was the story of the brand during Prohibition. So in Prohibition, Cotton Club, very famous speakeasy, it was the house whiskey there. So kind of the equivalent where you get table service at a club and you have to buy the bottle for really expensive. Same thing there. So if you wanted a table near the stage at the cotton club, you would order a bottle. The most popular bottle to buy was chicken cock, which was whiskey. They came out in a sealed tin can. They would ceremoniously open it up, table side, pull out the bottle. Really well known there, and then it became a popular serve at a lot of the other speakeasies, particularly in the New York area. And I actually read about that part of the history in Duke Ellington's memoirs. So he writes about chicken cock as the preferred house brand at the Cotton Club, and so that part of it was really, really neat to find. And when you kind of put all of it together, it became very clear to me that this was something that needed to be brought back to life. And so that really started that process. So that was kind of the treasure hunt part of it. And then if we go to the second slide. And everyone always asks me a chicken cock, like, what is a chicken cock? It's basically just a rooster. So prior to the, let's call it 1890s, the term rooster wasn't used. So a cock is just a male bird. And because we were good Puritans in this country, as the term cock started being really used for other purposes, farmers decided that they needed to come up with another term to call their male chickens. So that's when the term rooster started being used. Obviously, since we're in South Carolina, people are more comfortable with the term cock than in a lot of other places in the country. But the other part that, and this is, we always have, is fun, and chicken cocks, it's a great brand that's done very well, across the country and also outside the United States. But every once in a while, we do get a bar manager or a store owner or something. I don't like the name. And my favorite thing to do is to point to the cocktail list and ask them, what is this? And they say, well, it's a cocktail list. And I was like, well, where did cocktail come from? And they have no clue, right? And there are a couple explanations for where cocktail came from, but the most prevalent one is that when the cocktails were made, they would take a bird's feather, so in terms of rooster feather, cock's feather, and they would stir the cocktail. So that's one of the stories. So that's why it's called a cocktail. And usually that disarms my opponent fairly well, but and just some of the other stories. But so it's a really neat kind of story behind how the cocktail came about and the relevance to that. But so really, chicken cock is just a rooster, but it is one of the things that's the first thing that people really get excited about. It's what jumps out to them about the brand, and the key thing, and everyone's in here, I think, is a creative, and so you have to know, it's like when you're creating brands, right? It has to be relevant at some level, right? It's like, and especially in the alcohol space. If you go into a liquor store, there's a ton of brands out there, right? Or if you go into selecting a wine, right? It's just like, how do you choose one of the 1,000 Chardonnays? And so it's like trying to create these elements that really jump off the shelf to really capture people's attention. Right? And so chicken cock is the first thing that jumps off the shelf to capture people's attention. Great. Some people don't like the name, some people will love it, but they have an opinion, and that's super critical to the whole process. All right, we go to the next. And so the trick really then was how to take something that had this history, this deep, rich history, and then after Prohibition was already known as the famous old brand. Right, so it had already been the old brand 100 years ago. And refresh it and make it relevant to consumers today. Because we didn't want to just take what was done before and just bring it back as is, right? But you want to honor that tradition, that really the treasure that kind of we could tap into, but freshen it up, really make it why today? Why in this era, this new era of growth for bourbon? Luckily, in the early stage of the process of bringing this brand back, I literally found a treasure trove at the Oscar Getz Museum of Whiskey History, American Whiskey History in Bardstown, Kentucky. So if anyone's been to Bardstown, or if you go to Bardstown, which is really the heart of the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky, great town, going through a really neat growth period right now. But they've got this museum, and the museum is all brands and materials from pre-Prohibition. So Oscar Getz was a gentleman who ran one of the big distillers, and he would go on weekends, literally going to old tobacco barns and sifting around and finding old bottles, old tin signs, just anything kind of paraphernalia around the whiskey industry. He kept it all at his house. When he passed away, his wife is like, this stuff's getting out of here. And she's like, this is done. So he basically created a museum for everything that he collected. It's an extraordinary, if you're a whiskey fan or just a history fan, particularly that era in this country's history, it's a great place to go. So when I went there and asked if they had any chicken cock, pre-Prohibition chicken cock items, they had a lot, and it was really needed. So on this, the picture on this, on the left side or right side, I guess, where we're looking at it, those show some of the bottles that they had that were unopened bottles. There's been some evaporation, but from prior to Prohibition. So not only did we have examples of the actual product carving and bottles and labels, but we actually also had liquid, which is really neat, along with a lot of the point of sale and advertising that have been used for the brand. So we really had a great starting point from which to bring this back. And the Oscar Getz is the gift that keeps giving for us, because whenever we go back to Bardstown, we have people with us. We go to the museum, and I think every time I've been there, there's been more chicken cock stuff that they've found in like the back rooms and stuff like that, and a lot of it's on display. And so a really neat resource for us to tap into. Well, one thing I just noticed is, and we'll talk about the packaging, but is, it definitely has a very heritage look, but there's a lot of variety. The rooster's in different positions. He's crowing different ways. So a lot of the things that we think about now in terms of how we bring this brand to life, they were doing back then. So it's really tapping into a lot of the legacy of the brand. Go to the next slide. But in terms of bringing it to kind of the modern audience, and not just making it, hey, here's an old brand that we brought back, is we've really tried to incorporate kind of three key elements: collaboration, quality, and innovation, right? So the collaborative piece, we do not own our own distillery. So that was never part of the plan. I'm a brand builder, I'm not a manufacturer. They're very different skill sets, right? So my thing is building the brands and finding world-class producers to partner with. And so we've been able to collaborate with some amazing producers who are world-class at what they do. And so Bardstown Bourbon coming to the beautiful distillery in Bardstown, go there as well. They've got a great restaurant and bar as well. The quality side, which really should be a given. Hopefully anything we're creating, hopefully we're bringing something that is of quality to the marketplace. And then on the innovation side, which for me is the fun part, right? I like the brand side, I like the innovation, I like coming up with cool concepts, probably too often for most of the team. And so that's really where we've been able to leverage the history and like really bring and kind of create really unique expressions of this brand that are relevant to this day and age. Because the market today is very different than it was 100 years ago, even though a lot of people are drinking whiskey 100 years ago. It's kind of how it's developed, especially in terms of like small batches, single barrels, stuff like that, different unique barrel finishes. That's very different than kind of what the market was 100 years ago. So this is kind of the line. This is the lineup. And one thing you might notice is the first thing we did was to fatten up the rooster. So prior to Prohibition, the rooster was quite thin, and he was kind of scrawny looking. And maybe a reflection of the time period. But so one of the first things you said is, okay, we've got to fatten this rooster up. We've got to give him more vitality. And so we did that. And The other thing we did is we took the original bottles that were used prior to Prohibition. I borrowed them from the Oscar Getz Museum and also the Lexington Visitor Center, and replicated the molds. So all the packaging that we use is actual packaging that was used for the original brand. We have a kind of what I call honeycomb, or a lot of people say chicken wire bottle, which is kind of on the right side there, and also on, I guess, either end. And then more of the kind of like more of a medicinal looking bottle. So this was also a bottle that we found at the Oscar Getz Museum. We were able to take it and replicate it. And so, you know, it's tapping into that history of the brand from back then, but kind of, again, modernizing it. And where we have a lot of fun is on the labels. So whiskey is somewhat similar to beer, if people are familiar with kind of the process of creating beer labels. You can kind of have an infinite amount of expressions, right? Each year you can come out with something new, you can have a different wood finish, you can have that. So there's a lot of opportunity to get very creative with the labels. And so just in terms of kind of what we show here on the left are our everyday chicken cock, the Kentucky Straight Bourbon and the Kentucky Straight Rye. And then we start getting into a lot of the creativity. And what drives the creativity is generally the liquid itself. So we do, as the last one there is a Syrah barrel finish. The one before that is a cognac barrel finish. We tell the third one on the left there is actually a Canadian rye that we call the Cotton Club Rice that tells the story of the Prohibition era, and it's actually this one here where we created a tin, which was a replica of the Prohibition era tin that the bottle came in, and we tell the story on the back. This one retails for about $500 a bottle, so it's you know, very much that scarcity, kind of limited quantities, scarcity value to the brand at our limited releases that has really helped us grow the brand. And then one of my favorites is Island Rooster, which we did a Caribbean rum casks finish. So we really play up the more of like tropical themes on them. And the inspiration for that was a trip to Barbados where there are roosters running around everywhere. And so it struck me as a good idea to come up with something that would be that would really take that into account. And it's a great, you know, having a rum barrel finish on a whiskey is a delicious combination. The other thing that we've really focused on, this goes to the collaboration piece, and I think as a small company, as a small brand, I think this is where you can be very creative and nimble and kind of outkick your coverage, so to speak. And that is linking up with partners who, in a lot of cases, have much bigger audiences than us. Right, and doing something collaboratively that can then spread the message of our brand out to the marketplace. And it also lets us get super creative, again, on labels and marketing. And so these are 4 examples of collaborations we're doing this year. So one is with Kevin Kisner, who's a PGA golfer. He's from Aiken. Not having the greatest year, but great guy. And he's taking some time off to figure it out. But anyway, so he's, you know, so that's like kind of a personality associated, you know, attached barrel. Field Ethos, which is a media company that's in the kind of the hunting outdoors space. So they put a little like Teddy Roosevelt kind of cap on the rooster. And then Cricket shirts. People might be familiar with Cricket. They do a lot of Instagram advertising. They've got, kind of, we built up the rooster of having to wear one of the shirts, and then Ample Creative. And so these type of collaborations really allow us to, one, be very engaged with the creative community in general, right? So I think it's great. We have got a great team internally, but at a certain point, you're talking to yourself, right? So it's like, how do we go out and engage other creatives, other companies that are doing really cool things from a marketing perspective, and just be able to kind of amplify the idea generation. And that's one of the real values of doing some of these collaborations. We were able to then really define what the brand means today, right? So you're still leveraging kind of the 167, 8-year history of the brand, but it's what does the brand mean, in 2023? And hopefully this is a brand that will continue to live on for much longer than we're here for. People will be able to look back 100 years from now and say, okay, what were they doing with this brand in 2023, and building off of that. So that's kind of the vision of kind of a lot of this, how we kind of take the treasure that we found and kind of create kind of treasure today that then can be, kind of continuing forward. So that's the story of Chicken Cock. Yeah.
Question for Matti.
Was there any way to know what the bourbon tasted like earlier on, and are you in the same flavor profile as the entirely different?
Yeah, so good. Do I need the microphone? I don't know. So yes, it was actually an interesting part of the process early on. I tried to find a way to take the original liquid and have it be analyzed so we could know exactly what the mash bill was. Well, we figured out, one, that's harder to do than, I'm not a scientist, so I'm like, that should be easy. Apparently it's not. But through our research, what we realized, and this is kind of this is typical of whiskey, because whiskey trends change, right? Before World War II, everyone was drinking rye whiskey. It was like, if you see a Western and they go up to the bar, get a shot of whiskey and like shoot it back, that's rye. It's like super spicy, not like smooth, sugary like bourbon. It's like, hardcore kind of stuff. Rye's a great category, but it's very small now. So, compared to bourbon. So what we saw is that it changed over time, but the consistent piece that we've incorporated into what is the brand today, especially the core, it was always a high rye bourbon. So that meant there was more rye in the overall mix, versus some will be less rye, so they'll be a little bit sweeter. Some will have more malted barley, some will have more corn. So with that piece of it, we have incorporated. I've got a number of bottles that have not been opened from prior to Prohibition, and I'm like waiting for some kind of special occasion to open them and to actually start trying some of the different expressions. We've had a chance to try some of them, and they're good. But it's also, I think our techniques have gotten a lot better over 100 years in terms of producing whiskey. So, I prefer to drink today's version than probably Prohibition. Yeah.
So obviously you cheap off for branding. You've done a lot of branding for other brands. So what is your favorite part, or what do you treasure most when you're coming up with creating a new brand? What do you treasure most in the process of doing that?
Yeah. So I'd say it's different depending on what the starting point is, right? So I love creating things from nothing. Like that is my jam. Like I can do it all day long, that the process of just coming up with an idea and then starting to see that idea come to reality. I grew up in a family that was in the real estate space, real estate development, and so it struck me early on kind of how cool it was to kind of have a blank canvas, right? Sketch out a plan, see it start building up, and then all of a sudden have someone move into that you just created. And that's what really got me interested in creating brands, right? Is that having nothing and creating something that is of use to someone, right? and the just that process, especially at the beginning, because at the beginning of creating anything, the possibilities are infinite, right? I mean, it could become the greatest brand in the history of the world, or it could be a total dud, or you never know. I mean, there's just such a wide range, and so it creates that excitement of the unknown, that if you can really tap into that, and hopefully have people around you who can help, that's the exciting part for me. And then, and it's kind of like for all those out here who've had children, in a way it's like having children, right? You birth them, you nurture them, you hopefully give them really good instructions, but then at some point you have to release them to the wild, and they're gonna kind of do what they're gonna do, right? And so building a brand is a very similar process in my mind. And so you kind of create the foundations for which it can be successful. Then at a certain point, you've got to kind of like unlock the door and let it go do its thing. And sometimes they do amazing. Sometimes they crash into a wall.
Hi, I'm Paula Brady. It's very nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. I wondered if you reflect back on this whole history that you've been through. What were a couple of the most important decisions you made to foster your growth?
Yeah. So I think, when we were bringing back Chicken Cock, it was right at the beginning of this, I'd say, rediscovery of bourbon as the quintessential American spirit. So up until, let's just call it, 10, 12 years ago, there was zero growth in bourbon. It was, if you talk to people who've been in the liquor industry for a long time, they say it's like where careers went to die, because it was basically just flat growth. And it was really after the downturn it was really after 08, 10, 11, is when there was this move to kind of rediscovering, kind of going more local. It was less about the bling of, let's go to the club and spray Cristal on each other, and more like, let's be more responsible. We just went through like kind of a economic Armageddon kind of situation. And so that's when you saw the growth of like craft beer in particular really accelerate. So we were in that process, and one of the things that we got caught in was that the availability of aged liquid all of a sudden just kind of stopped, because all the big producers had always sold their excess to other brands, but then they found themselves, they basically had always projected no growth. So all of a sudden now they were in a category that was growing 20, 30%, and they were like, we're in trouble, because you can't just like decide you're gonna bottle more tomorrow. That you have to think in 5, 6+ year increments in whiskey. So what that forced us to do, which wasn't a great situation when it was happening, but now I think is one of the reasons why we've had success with the brand, is to really go to this scarcity model. So limited releases where we would do a barrel or two at a time, high price points, not a lot available, so it created this kind of sense of urgency around when we would release a new release, it would sell out right away. And we were doing that while we were laying down our own whiskey that now is coming of age, which has allowed us to release everyday bourbons and ryes that are more widely available, but we still do the limited releases. And by focusing on the limited releases, again, because we really had no choice, because we don't have enough whiskey to put in bottles for broader consumption, really built up a lot of pent-up demand for the brand and established it at a very high price point that we are now, for the most part, able to maintain as the brand is getting bigger. So that was a kind of a critical piece. It was painful at the time, but it was a critical part of the story of how Chicken Cock is perceived today as an ultra premium whiskey, versus being a situation where we started out a lot of brands will start out a bit lower price point. We start out very high, a lot of scarcity, it was coveted by collectors, and we've been able to maintain a lot of that halo as we've grown the brand. So I would say that was a critical piece of the story.
Okay, last question. It's Friday, thank goodness. Where can our creatives go to celebrate with a glass of chicken cock and or buy a bottle?
Go. So generally any liquor store in this area should have chicken cock. We're pretty well distributed here locally and around South Carolina, and now more and more you're able to find chicken cock at most of the major retailers. Again, benefit of our whiskey that we lay down coming of age, so it's a lot more widely distributed. For some of our limited releases, the ones that are really hard to find, we usually have some allocation left on our website, which is chickencockwhiskey.com. And then in terms of the bars and restaurants, pretty good distribution here. We've always, because of the scarcity around the brand, we've tended to be more retail than in on-premise or bars and restaurants. So that's starting to change now as well. We've been able to go more into bars and restaurants because we have enough product to supply them. So that's now starting to pop up. Hopefully any bar, restaurant, if they don't have it, they'll have heard of it and then ask for it, and that's a great way of getting them to carry it.
Great, everybody give it up for Matti. Okay, we are gonna wrap it up, get you to work on time this morning.